Hey gang, this week's episode of Still Untitled, The Adam Savage Project, is brought to you by Tested Premium Memberships. To find out how you can support Tested directly, go to tested.com/membership. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Still Untitled, The Adam Savage Project. I'm Will.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Norm.
How's everybody doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm a little stressed, I have to admit. I'm juggling a bunch of different things.
You got some balls in the air.
I have many balls in the air. We are back in production on Mythbusters, and it's going great. Production's going great. We've got some fantastic stories we're filming. And today, we're doing podcasting in the shop, but we're doing a couple of other sequence and segments, and I've got like 3 other things on the fire.
The balls are in the air.
Yeah. I'm teaching my son how to drive a stick this afternoon.
So I took a test. I did a long test drive in a i3, a BMW i3, their electric car this weekend, and it made me it drives differently than most gas-powered cars because when you let off the gas, even the slightest bit, it starts regenerative charging, and it just slams to a stop.
Oh, it doesn't roll.
No, there's no coast. And I had to think about how I learned to drive again at 40 years of age, and I don't know how you teach My wife and I were talking about it as we were driving around because we have a 2-year-old. It's a distant future for us. But you're teaching your kids how to drive now, and I don't know how, A, how you do that in a big ass city like San Francisco, or B, even what the rules are now.
Well,
for kids.
It's thing 2 is the first one to have completed his online driver's test and had his first official lesson. So I am now allowed to put him behind the wheel of my car.
That's the most valuable slip of paper for a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
The driver's permit.
So you have to. They have to take an online test, which we have to do for a learner's permit.
Which the online test takes. The online course takes something like 20 hours.
Wow.
It's a bunch of time. I'm not positive that's exactly 20 hours, but he did it over Christmas, I think.
It's a lot of watching videos and stuff like that?
I think so, and a lot of just gathering information. And then he went to the DMV and took the test, failed it the first time.
Okay.
Everyone fails it the first time.
California's driver's test was hard. I almost failed it when I moved here as a 25-year-old. Yeah.
And when he repeated some of the questions, I got some of them wrong.
Those are the questions you never, ever forget.
Right.
You got wrong. I know which ones I got wrong on the written exam. Because logically, some of them you think, it makes more sense. It's safer this way.
I know.
Well, and they're ambiguous, too.
But it's not.
Yeah, it's weirdly ambiguous. At any rate, he finally passed it on the second run. And thing 2 is quick with the physical. They're both actually very physically adept. And for the last few years, I think I've said this on the podcast before, I've taken them to the Infineon Raceway to do go-kart racing on their birthdays. And last time I went, I had trouble keeping up with thing 2. And, it doesn't hurt that he's got 50 pounds. He's 50 pounds lighter than me.
And a complete lack of fear.
There's that, too. Right? He still thinks he's immortal.
He's Daredevil, essentially.
So I'm not that actually worried about, driving to, let's say, a quiet neighborhood in San Francisco like the Sunset or the Richmond. And letting him work his way up through the gears.
Just to be clear, you're not going to take him out in a souped-up Chevy Camaro and teach him how to drift in a parking lot at 2 a.m., right?
No, I promise I will not do that.
Just making sure.
He will, in fact, be driving my Fiat Abarth.
Okay. That's a pretty peppy car for a kid. I learned to drive on a brown 1984 Ford no-label station wagon. It was a year between names.
Wow.
So they just did. It's the only year that that wagon existed.
I learned in a Toyota pickup truck.
Oh, that's a good
stick shift.
Well, I learned to drive manual transmission in a Land Cruiser. And then my first car that I bought was a Ford Ranger, a 1985 Ford Ranger. And it was a 5-speed manual, and it was real bouncy.
I kind of love the fact that the boys will not have a car while they're living in San Francisco. It's just not feasible.
You don't need one.
No, you don't need one, and there's nowhere to park it.
Yeah.
Do you have any desire for scooters or Vespas or
no? And I'm steering. I've actually long inculcated them with the idea that those are terrible ideas for transport. They're fun. But they're death machines.
Yeah.
They're the reason that in an emergency room they call them donor cycles. I had 3 different motorcycles, and I loved them, but I gave them up when the boys were in utero because...
You didn't want to make orphans of them.
Yes.
Yeah, no, but...
And the best motorcycle rider I ever knew was T-boned on 19th Avenue and killed a few years back. A good friend of Grant Imahara and Tori Belleci and I.
Well, I mean, even our friend Brian, he might have had the accident before you knew him, but he was a devout motorcycle rider for the first 2 or 3 years that I knew him, and then he was just driving along and didn't even do anything wrong. Somebody just came over on him and pinned his leg between the car and the motorcycle and broke it in like 4 places.
Right.
And he was laid up for 6 months.
Yeah.
He was like, well, that's probably the end of my motorcycle riding.
No, and scooters also, by the way, I'm not a big fan of any vehicle that you can drive while your legs are actually crossed.
Wow.
Okay, so the electric unicycle passes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's interesting is all three of us drive, obviously, and we are comfortable driving, but it's tough to put yourself in the mindset of someone who's never really driven before. How do they think? Do you remember how did you think a car worked?
Oh,
'Cause
it's funny. I kind of knew how you shifted up through the gears. Actually, Thing 2 has sat in the passenger seat and shifted for me. And I think the Fiat is a great car for him to learn on because it's a pretty tight little clutch window, which is great to learn on a tighter rather than looser clutch.
Yeah, I learned on a pickup truck. And, well, actually, I learned on a tractor, which is the loosest of clutch windows.
Boy, yeah.
And then, from there, everything feels like a
You
sports
can
car.
mail a letter to the clutch and the clutch
Pretty
will
much.
respond.
but the momentum of a car, we're talking about rolling and how electric cars don't roll like
Yeah.
gas cars do. In the future, if we have all electric, like people are going to learn to drive differently. The rolling aspect of a car helps so much.
It does.
I think that's a 10-year, like in 20 years.
I think the shift is going to be fairly simple. I mean,
Yeah.
there'll be natives to it, right? Where we aren't.
Exactly. That's why it's uncomfortable.
I mean, if you think about my daughter, who's 2 now, in 16 years, 14 years, it's really likely that there will be a significant number of cars on the road that just drive themselves most of the time.
Oh yeah, and you can sit in the back and
Right.
Wow, that's
And she'll look at me and be like, "Oh, you."
This is I've heard this theory.
Back when I was a
Yes.
girl, when you're so old, Dad, that you just have to drive your own car, right? I mean,
we went on a vacation and Daddy got to drive.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, we got outside
That'll
of the.
be what it's like.
I don't
outside
think
of
that
the
people
limit.
will ever not want to own their own cars.
Look, it's going to take at least 2 generations for that to happen, but I think it's plausible.
The millennials
People
already
won't own their cars.
Yeah.
And
aren't super into it.
I can't.
I know, I
fathom
can't
that.
conceive of it either, but it's also, at a certain point, we still are in the tens of thousands of deaths per year nationally from auto-related accidents.
It's more than that, isn't it?
I think it's 20 or 30,000
Okay.
a year. It's lots, right?
It's right up there with the stuff that actually
Cancer
kills people.
and
Yeah.
shit. Yeah. If autonomous cars within the first, say, decade are able to start saving something like 10,000 lives a year, that's an impossible to ignore. We right now have national campaigns for things that... Okay, so that was a large
loud.
piece of camera equipment falling over.
Joey's running, but it'll probably be okay. It's got a case. It didn't land on your lens, so that's good.
That's true.
Yeah.
Was that my camera?
No.
No.
My lens.
Oh, it's Norm's lens.
At any rate, where was I?
You're saying if it
10,000
saves,
yes.
if it saves a certain number of lives.
I think that, Norm, if it all of a sudden starts to save lives and be incredibly convenient, and also perhaps instead...
Convenience, I think, is the bigger factor.
Convenience,
I think it's both.
And also mobility across class systems, right? So it's not like you have these rich people sitting in giant eggs while they get taken to work, while the poor people are in heavy-duty buses, but you're able to spread that around the populace.
And we have some understanding of how Google's testing autonomous cars, and logistically it makes sense. A car sharing economy makes sense. A system, infrastructure where your cars are being wasted in a garage,
Right.
Where it's always picking someone up, and the problems solve themselves.
Think about the amount of resources tied up in cars that stay parked 90% of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's partially why systems like Lyft and Uber work. But I think it's human nature.
It's human nature right now.
Yeah.
It's American
Human
nature.
right
Is
now,
the
yeah.
thing.
And very
I think
American
that's a
nature.
mutable. I think it's a plastic reality.
And I mean, if you think about it, so I'm looking at buying an electric car. It has a 75-mile range.
That would kill me.
Vast majority of my days are 44 miles total round trip. I have a thing in the car that tracks that. Occasionally, I go up to 60 miles, and if you get the one with the little gas engine, it'll get you through that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
My daily drive is much more than that. I mean,
You're
we were
all
just
over the
filming in
place.
Altamont this
Yeah.
week, so it's it's like 48 miles or something out there, 53 miles.
You have a little bit of an unusual commute situation.
I do.
Now,
It changes all the time.
Did your son go through driver's school and have to watch the infamous video?
Oh, blood on the highway?
Guts and gravel.
Red asphalt.
Red asphalt.
I believe that's...
I don't know. I'll have to ask him. But suffice to say, I actually think that he is going to take to the mechanical thing. He has already been subscribing to Motor Trend and Car and Driver for a couple of years.
Well, but having enthusiasm for cars and being a good driver are two completely different things.
They are, but when you're a kid and you're obsessed, I think it puts you into a mindset that is ideal for learning quickly.
Respecting the machine.
Yeah.
The thing for me about learning to drive, and like many people, the statistics say if you're going to have an accident in a motor vehicle, you probably, that you cause, it usually happens within the first 2 years after you started driving.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's why insurance premiums for 16 and 17-year-olds are so spectacularly high. So I had an accident when I was 17 years old, and literally, it was because I hadn't internalized the mechanics of other cars on the road and me on the road.
Yeah.
And I just made a bad judgment on a car that was coming out in front of me, and I crossed in front of him too close, and he was probably speeding.
Right.
But still my fault and my mistake.
One of the things I've been telling them from the get-go, the moment it was coming, it was visible in the distance, the idea that they'd be driving, I've been saying, be predictable. It is the single safest thing you can do is to be predictable to the people around you and to make sure that your behavior is predictable. I remember when I was first driving that changing lanes was completely terrifying.
Yeah, yes.
And I passed it, we had lots of these little 2-lane roads.
Well, you were in a rural area, so you weren't on the freeway a lot, right?
There was a highway. We had Route 9 in Westchester County, which is like 2 lanes, and so crappy. Westchester County has signs all over saying, New York State is responsible for this highway.
Was it limited access? Did you have to merge onto it, or could you turn right into the stop sign?
No, it's goes right through every neighborhood and right through the towns and stuff like that.
That's what I learned. We weren't allowed to get on the interstate when we were first starting to drive because it was a 20-mile drive from the house.
Right.
It was outside of the range.
And thing two is telling me in the driver's lesson he had on Saturday, they took him right out to Cesar Chavez, and he's shifting lanes out there.
Wow.
Terrifying.
That's intense, too.
I know. I was like, that all rules of normal traffic are suspended on roads like Cesar Chavez or 24th Street. Just those are scary streets.
Mad Max out there.
Yeah, totally.
Basically, you're one little kid with a boomerang away from the end times.
Well, and then, they watch me making left and right turns off of my corner here in the Mission, which is like a freaking Frogger game.
Well, so part of it, though, has to be teaching them ingraining habits. One of the things that I had to learn when I moved to a city where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic that I'd never encountered driving in the suburbs and even mid-sized American countries where cities where people don't walk.
Right.
Is that you have to always be aware of pedestrians in the crosswalk, and it's especially dangerous at dusk or toward the end of the day when it's starting to get dark and it's drizzling or something like that. They're all wearing black raincoats and they're
all
essentially
wearing black
invisible.
Raincoats, and half of them are jogging and will just run out into the street and expect you to stop, and you have to.
Well, and the place that's especially dangerous for me because of the glasses is that post. The blind spot by the post by the pillar on the left side of the car.
So this is one thing I've also been telling them. My first big accident was I checked behind me and turned around and slammed into the car in front of me.
Oh.
That's the scariest thing about lane changing.
And one thing I was saying to them is you have to have an impression of how things are moving here. Look and come back. Look and always expect that someone's going to stop the second you look away, because they will, and you have to be ready for that. That's one of those places where
think about that, because you're lane changing, you have to speed up to eventually lane change.
Right.
And so situational awareness, the glance, you don't glance and linger.
Yeah.
You glance quickly and then glance again.
Nice for the situational awareness. We got corrected on the on the site in the comments for me saying proprioception.
Right.
That they were proprioception is your sense of your own body in space. Situational awareness is your sense of other bodies in space.
Well, so I mean, that's one of those things that amazes me about the capacity of the human brain, right? It's you've done the thing where you're on the road trip, and after you get going for a while, you just know, okay, the red Camry's behind me, the blue pickup truck's in front of me, there's a guy coming up on the left, and there's an 18-wheeler in the right lane, and you don't even have to think after you've been driving for a while.
You just are able to place those pieces on a board in your head and have a sense of where they're moving and how they're moving.
Right.
And that's, again, why it's so critical to be predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as someone shows up going 120 and you're all going 70, which happens in California,
All
not
the time.
infrequently, if you are, let's say, about to make a lane change and you're not signaling, that's potentially lethal.
Yeah. And it might not be your fault because if someone else is going
Might not
120,
be your
but it
fault,
doesn't matter.
but you have to just, I mean, my parents, that was one of the things when my dad, the two things I remember my dad teaching me was, get your foot off that clutch.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'd rest my foot on the clutch, but
Oh, yeah.
It's a great point. I think one of the things that we're all taught by, family members or parents, but that voice, it's one of the things that always sticks with you.
yep.
The voice of your
I know, and I'm
your
thinking
mom.
about that seriously. Like,
all
I'm
the
about to
time.
be that voice.
Yeah.
This is my first driving lesson with him.
That's crazy.
So the other thing I remember him saying was, drive as if everyone on the road wants to destroy you.
Huh.
That's a safe.
Be
That, like,
super proactively defensive.
the thing that my dad said was, and my mom too, actually, because they split duties because they're both masochists, I guess. But they basically said, look, assume you should always be thinking about how to get out of a situation caused by everyone that you can see at any moment, which sounds kind of intense. But once you get used to thinking about, okay, if that guy pulls out, I'll swerve to the right, then it just becomes second nature, and it doesn't even occur to me anymore to think, okay, that guy could pull out in front of me. Am I going to be able to brake in time to not kill anybody? Am I going to be able to brake in time to, like, the other thing is constantly doing, the other thing my mom always did was the constant practices. So she would be driving and say, what would you do if that guy swerved into your lane to avoid a cat?
Yes.
And like that kind of stuff. Like how do you do, it's the iRobot problem, right? Do you swerve to avoid the car and maybe hit another car and have a less bad wreck than you would if you had a head-on collision? Or do you slam on the brakes and hope that the head-on collision isn't as bad as, and how do you decide all that stuff in the fractions of a second that you have? Her theory was always that you have to have that, like you have to be constantly thinking about that stuff.
Yeah.
Or else.
It's like I once got into a terrible accident because I swerved from one lane into the other to avoid something, and I slammed into someone. And now I'm much less likely to swerve.
Yeah.
Like the devil I know.
Yeah. I'd much rather hit a road alligator, one of those big retread tires that's in the freeway, and wreck the bottom of my car, maybe get a little bit of air, than swerve into and get run over by an 18-wheeler.
Do you feel like that? Obviously, like the things that stick with you are when you've made the mistakes. Whether it's the
Well,
exam,
and that's the trick is to get.
and so do you almost hope that they get the fear, they get into not that they get hurt, but you want to have a way for them to get that lesson ingrained in them.
You totally do, and that's a tricky one. I have to admit, I was not a great driver before I started doing MythBusters. All the training we've had over the years has turned me into a very competent, sort of almost stunt driver. But I was not awesome before that. I wasn't able to split my attention very well. I was one of those people who, if I looked to the right, I started steering over to the right.
Oh.
That kind of thing.
You were a New York driver. We had a word for you people.
And I have had my share of all minor accidents, but I've had 4 or 5 accidents in which I've been sideswiped, been T-boned, rear-ended, and been rear-ended. Under all different circumstances. I'd say half of the accidents I've been in were absolutely my fault, and those have made me a better driver.
You don't make
It's a terrible cost.
It's the near miss,
Yeah.
but you hope that you learn something from that. It's going to happen.
One of the worst accident I've been in. No one was hurt, but I did try and make a left from the second lane to the left on Franklin, heading north. And I took out the traffic light in front of Jardiniere.
Oh, my goodness.
Back in
that's funny.
2004. And I recently mentioned it to Tracy, and she's like, oh, my God, that was you. I totally remember that happening.
The learning from the mistakes, I think the thing that my parents did that I felt was important was that they tried, my dad was a car dealer when he finished high school and didn't want to go to college for a few years and then ended up going to college. But as a result, he had loaner cars from the dealership all the time, and it was the late 50s, early 60s. So they were, it was basically Mad Men for car dealers, and they were crashing cars left and right all the time. And as a result of that, he shared a lot of valuable stories and things that I learned to avoid. What was it like for you learning to drive in San Francisco, Norm?
It's very simple. I drove an Oldsmobile, automatic all the way. In the Sunset. It's
like the
silly.
big square boxy one?
The big square box.
Nice.
Yeah.
Rides like your living room.
Oldsmobile, lots of...
Velour interior?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
My grandmother had one of those.
Really?
Yeah, like, it was...
It probably had an enormous,
car.
like, 358 engine or something in it.
Yeah, it was
right?
very powerful.
Yeah.
Did you both pass your first actual driver's test?
Yeah, but Tennessee, it was like Tennessee, some sort of livestock could probably pass the driver's test.
I did, and if I remember the mistake I made.
You did?
Yeah,
You passed
I
it,
did.
but you made
I had one
mistake.
strike that was not like touching the curb with the parking, which I think is...
Really? They give you a strike if you touch the curb when
If
you park?
touch the curb, you park, you fail the exam.
What?
In California.
For parallel parking?
For any parking.
Wow.
I didn't have the parallel. I had just the slide in, but if you touch the curb, that's it.
Wow, that's crazy town.
I failed my first driver's test. I took the first driver's test in a standard. I was on a hill, and an 18-wheeler pulled up right to my back bumper, and I took my foot off the brake and started to slide, and the tester had to pull my e-brake.
Oh no!
That turns out to be an automatic fail.
Yeah.
So the next time I took it in my neighbor's automatic.
So I learned to drive a manual transmission in a field in Northern Virginia with my aunt's Land Cruiser.
It's just every time you got a story like that.
You have no idea. So when I got back to Tennessee and we were driving my mom's car, which was a manual transmission Jeep, she let me drive because I had a permit and all that. And I got to a stop sign on a hill on a busy road, and some people that I went to school with that were acquaintances but not friends, and maybe cordial, maybe not, kind of a weird high school relationship, pulled up directly on the bumper behind me when they saw that it was me at the stop sign. And it didn't have a pull brake. It had a foot e-brake because it was a Jeep. That was a bad time.
That was a bad time.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So what's one big piece of advice that you would give to new drivers? And what was one thing you learned? I know you shared yours already.
Yeah.
To just always be thinking about how to get out of the situation. Like, that's just general good life advice, I think.
Right. It's like you're Jason Bourne. You want to spot your exit.
Yeah.
You want to pretend you're a spy in your head.
Yeah.
You always want to be Batman. The one best piece of advice that I got from my parents when driving is when driving other people, you might feel really comfortable about your ability to drive, but you have no sense of their comfort.
No.
And they're always, because you're the ones with the hands on the wheel.
That's true.
And if you're driving with their comfort in mind, you're a much better and safer driver.
You're absolutely right. And, somebody once told me whenever you see a Penske truck or a big U-Haul truck, you have to think, that's the first time they've driven something that big.
Yeah.
And it's a great bit of advice about those things because visibility is terrible and they can be terrifying. And if you think that about everybody on the road, you're going to be a lot more empathetic about what's going on and have a better situational awareness. We could talk about this in a couple of weeks. I'll tell you how it goes.
Okay, I'm interested to hear.
I'm going to try and stay calm. I'm going to show up with a helmet.
You're going to put the helmet on? I was going to ask. You have plenty, so...
We'll both be wearing helmets.
Okay, that's good. It'll be like Better Off Dead, right?
Exactly.
I think we don't have a better note to end on than that.
Let's hear your driving stories.
Yeah, please post them in the comments. We love to hear that kind of stuff. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Still Untitled. See you guys later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.